Hello everybody, Dr. Decklist here, coming at you with my first full decklist video. And I'm pretty excited here today because I got a cool one to show you guys. This deck was inspired by these dudes, Eldrazi processors. These guys came out in Battle for Zendikar when I first started playing Magic, and there's just some good nostalgia factor here for me. I just really wanted to make a deck around these guys because I felt connected to them. And I think you should totally do the same if you have any connection to a certain set or mechanic or whatnot. So, getting into the deck, this is the commander, Fel of the Nightclad. She's going to give all of our creatures Intimidate. This is really nice because all of our creatures, or all of our Eldrazi processors, have Devoid. So therefore, they're going to be getting in for damage really easily when we have Vela out. Her other text here, whenever her or another creature leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. This is also going to be pretty relevant because our Eldrazi processors have enter the battlefield effects. And this means that we're going to be wanting to play a sort of flicker sub-theme. If you guys don't know what flicker is, it's just make a creature leave and then come back, so it triggers its enter the battlefield effect again. And she says when a creature leaves the battlefield. So all these flickers, creatures leaving the battlefield, it's going to be triggering our commander and pinging our opponents, getting in for damage. Essentially, our commander is just a nice toolbox piece to help us end the game. So what exactly is an Eldrazi processor? These guys, they say when they enter the battlefield, do an effect. All their effects are pretty generic, but you can only do the effect if you're able to put some number of cards from an opponent's exile back into their graveyard. And this is a really weird effect in Magic, because normally a card in exile is going to be there for the rest of the game, unless it says like play it from exile or whatnot. But yeah, when you say exile a creature, that creature is supposed to be gone forever, but we can put those back into the graveyard, and because of that, there's some weird shenanigans that these cards can do, but we'll get into that later. For now, I'm just going to continue to talk about the deck list. These are our 3 core pillars of the deck, sort of. We need our Eldrazi processors in the middle here. We need ways to flicker them, which Deadeye Navigator is really good at. And we need ways to fill our opponent's exile. And we need that to be, we'll call that our Eldrazi processor food. I'm going to be referencing that as our processor food for the rest of the video, just filling our opponent's exile. Anyway, yeah, we want to be doing these 3 things. So I think it's really cool that we get to play all the Ashioks in this deck. All the Ashioks are going to be doing filling your opponent's exile for whatever reason, and I always just thought this middle Ashiok was really cool. I used to see her be played in Standard, and she was just really sweet. So playing her in a Commander deck feels pretty fun, and actually getting to get some use out of filling your opponent's exile is pretty nice here. Some other ways to fill exile. We got Sire of Stagnation. I freaking love this dude. Again, he came out in Battle for Zendikar, so some good nostalgia factor here. And he just says when a land enters the battlefield on our opponent's scroll, we're gonna fill our opponent's exile and we're gonna draw some cards. This guy kind of works as like that weird Sphinx, sort of like a slower. Oh god, I forget the name of this. The really awesome Sphinx that draws you 2 cards whenever an opponent draws a card. I'll pop it up on the screen. Anyway, this guy sort of works like that, just getting you a bunch of cards on other people's turns as they're playing lands. Really good in a 4-player game. Really good at filling your exile for processor food, or opponent's exile. And we also got Pyxis of Pandemonium here, which is one of the first weird interactions that we get to do with our Eldrazi processors. Pyxis says we get to exile cards from everybody's library face down, and then we can sacrifice the Pyxis later to put all permanents in these face down piles under their respective player's control. But what's really cool here is we get to use our processors to actually take cards from this face down exile pile and put it in our opponent's graveyards, no longer being exiled under the Pyxis, meaning that when we sacrifice the Pyxis, that as long as we've cleared out whatever the heck else is under there, we are the only one that benefits. So it's pretty cool. Another really cool benefit to filling our opponent's exiles is Oblivion Sower can go crazy in this deck. I've had this card get me like 5 to 7 lands pretty easily, and I'm sure you can get it much farther than that. the ramp here is pretty sweet from Oblivion Sower. Alright, and so the next pillar of the deck here is flickering, like I was talking about. These are just two really strong flicker cards, but we're going to be playing another sort of flicker engine, I'm going to call it, that I'm sure some of you guys have seen before, especially Pauper players, because this is a way to go infinite in Pauper. Anyway, we're going to use these cards like this, that exile two things, that flicker two things specifically. We need to have one instant or sorcery that can flicker two things. This is because we're going to play these cards alongside cards like Archaeomancer that allow us to grab an instant or sorcery from our graveyard when it enters the battlefield. So if you guys don't know, if you have a Ghostly Flicker and Archaeomancer and one other thing to flicker, which here we're going to be using our processors, then you can flicker the Archaeomancer and one other thing, and the Archaeomancer will grab your Ghostly Flicker back, allowing you to continuously flicker for 3 mana essentially. And this is really cool with Ulamog's Nullifier. I've actually gotten to set this up too before playing this deck, where we essentially just turn Ghostly Flicker into 3 mana counter spell, as long as we have enough cards for our Nullifier to process away. We even get to add a Archaeomancer processor. I think this is just some really cool overlap of the deck here. We really like Archaeomancer effects, we like processors, and there's actually a processor that works as Archaeomancer. So there you go. And the other thing we get to do in this deck that's really freaking strong is playing Colorless. I'm sure you guys have seen that Colorless is getting a lot of support recently. We get to play cards like Forsaken Monument to pump up all of our stuff and make a ton more mana, gain a bunch of life. We get to play Urza's, or Liberator, Urza's Battlethopter, to give pretty much all of our stuff flash to be able to play on everybody's turns. And Mystic Forge just gets us a bunch of card advantage. And we even get to play both Ugins here, with the Ugin the Spirit Dragon being just a one-sided board wipe, and Ugin the Ineffable just reducing this cost of most of our spells. And yeah, Modern Horizons 3 sort of took this up a notch, the whole Colorless deck up a notch. It sort of used to be a fringe theme trying to play colorless stuff, but now you could just go crazy with Colorless. So yeah, we got a lot of support here for this deck in Modern Horizons 3, no doubt. And we even get to play Geode Golem. This guy's a super fun addition in our deck because Vel the Nightclad is a 6 mana card, and he's a colorless creature. So when he connects, we get Vela for free, sort of just giving us 6 mana, which is pretty sweet. And then from there on, he's a colorless creature that can continue to connect well because we have Vela out. So now let's talk about the weird interactions that Eldrazi processors can do. Like I said, they're one of the only effects that puts a card from exile back into a graveyard, or back into gameplay essentially. And because of that, we can do some very, very weird things. So I'm going to start with Suspend here because I didn't actually realize all the weird stuff you could do with these guys until I played this, because I have a Suspend deck and this processor deck, and I lended my friend a Suspend deck the Suspend deck one time, and I started realizing how rude I could be to a Suspend deck with this processor stuff. So if you don't know Suspend, it says you can pay some amount of mana, and rather than cast a spell from your hand, you pay that mana and exile it with some amount of time counters on it. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you remove a time counter, and when the last is removed, you play the spell for free. But the key thing that Suspend says is you exile it. You're going to be exiling this card. It's going to be hanging out in exile, waiting to be cast. And during that time, hanging out in exile, we can actually use our processors, take this out of exile, put it in their graveyard, and no longer be sitting there waiting to cast. So any Suspend player, any player playing like Gandalf or whatnot, just pull out your processor deck and they're never getting their free spells from Suspend ever. It's hilarious. This also works with Banishing Light effects. Banishing Light, it says exile non-land permanent opponent controls until Banishing Light leaves. So if you have, let's say opponent 1 has a really strong creature and opponent 2 exiles this creature, and you're like, I don't want opponent 1 to be dealing with that Banishing Light and getting their creature back. So I'm just going to use my processor, process that creature out of the Banishing Light, and now when the Banishing Light comes back, there's nothing under it, and opponent 1 doesn't get their thing back. This actually works with a card in our deck, surprisingly enough. Gelatinous Cube sort of works as a Banishing Light style effect, where we get to exile a creature when it enters the battlefield. And yeah, we get to process that creature away after exiling it. So Gelatinous Cube works really well here, especially because we're flickering things, because we get to use the cube, exile a creature, then process that creature away from the cube or out of the cube, and then we get to flicker the cube, eat something else, process it away again, and just keep the cycle going, keep killing things with this Gelatinous Cube. It's pretty sweet. And this weird style of effect actually also works with some other opponents' flicker stuff. If a player says flicker a creature and return that creature to the battlefield next end step, if it doesn't return instantly, then that means there's some time between the creature being exiled and the creature coming back. And during that time period, you can play a processor, process that card that's being flickered away into the graveyard, and it's not coming back. It's super weird, it's super mean. Definitely don't play this deck against Rune or any suspend decks unless you want to be really mean to your friends. But yeah, that's about all I got. If you guys enjoyed this video, definitely like and subscribe.